note on the auction, these two items up here we will be auctioning off in. Again, this is a nonprofit, so all proceeds go to benefit the museum, which helps educate children around the state of Kentucky. We already have a reserve bid on this, what is distilled in the late 60s, you said, Julian.
68 and 70, two different sets of barrels.
So this would have been under your father's guidance at Stitzel-Weller Distillery. So we have a very historic bottle here. We already have a reserve bid on that for $1,000. We will also bid the 10-year-old here. That's a contemporary one. But be thinking about this. This is once in a lifetime whiskey. Some of you all will taste it because of the rarity of Mr. Van Winkle's incredible whiskey. We were not able to get everyone the same stuff. So some people have 1970s, 1980s era W.L. Weller. Some of you have what won Best Bourbon in the World 2 years ago at San Francisco World Spirits Competition in the Pappy Van Winkle 15-year-old. And then some of you have the sister bottle that's sitting up here, the 12-year-old Van Winkle. So it is if you're not happy with your choice of what you got there, you can maybe flag someone over there and say you want to trade me in between questions or something like that. But it's a great problem to have in that you have before you the most coveted and sought after American whiskey in history. So another little piece I want to bring up is many of you have been here in my sessions before. This is a very talk show oriented setup. I try to do this very journalistically and have a conversation with our guests, and I try to keep it topical and news oriented. And as you know, there was an international incident that happened a couple years ago, and someone stole a bunch of Pappy Van Winkle. Since that is an ongoing investigation, I will not be asking about that. And Julian will be unable to answer those questions if you ask those. So when it comes time to the audience and asking questions, Pappy Heiss can't answer that. Not even speculate. So, Julian, thank you so much for coming here. You're easily one of the top 5 most important people for bourbon's return. Bourbon was nowhere, and then your whiskey started winning awards, and then suddenly people started paying attention. I don't think it's a coincidence, and just from right at the stop, I just want to say thank you so much for coming here and what you've done for bourbon.
Great, my pleasure.
Now, when I'm doing tastings with people, they're always coming up to me asking me tell me about Pappy Van Winkle, and they're actually really shocked to learn that Pappy was a real person. They think it's just a made-up name. Tell us about Pappy. He scraped and clawed in this business up until Prohibition. Tell us about Pappy.
Well, he went to Center College. He's from Danville. His dad was Secretary of State in Kentucky, and Pappy attended Center for a couple of years, and up to a few years ago, I didn't really realize it, but he never graduated from Center. I don't believe, because I think he went there for a couple of years, and even though there is a name of a building there after some of our family, he went up to Weller, Louisville, and got a job with William LaRue Weller as a salesman for the Weller distributors. And was horse and buggy back then, 1893, and his territory was northern Kentucky. He'd be gone for weeks and weeks at a time. He would sell, whiskey to everybody and all the other products that the Wellers had. They had wine back then. They had gin. The Stitzel distillery, Mr. A.P.H. Stitzel, was obviously making whiskey for the Wellers, and that was the main bourbon brand that they were producing. The Stitzel distillery would put their Weller sign above the distillery door a few days a year and make their particular product and bottle it under the Weller label. And that's what Pappy was selling along with the other Weller brands. Even had some Weller Zinfandel or something like that. I don't think it was too fine, but a lot of different products. And really got in the business that way, and then became an officer of the company after a while working there, and then worked with Mr. Stitzel and Alex Farnsley as far as becoming the three officers that started the modern-day Stitzel-Weller distillery, as I call it, which opened up in 1935 here in Louisville.
And, from when you were growing up, was there this fascination with the family business? What was that like?
Fascinating only because I learned how to drink whiskey at a very young age when I'd get a cough, which I have right now.
Well, we got some whiskey here.
Yeah, but I take a little taste of that in a minute. But as most of you know, the little lemon and honey and a little bourbon is great for a cough. And that's all NyQuil is anyway, is alcohol, I believe. And but learned to enjoy it. But it was just normal to us to have bourbon around all the time. Obviously, my father brought it home, and we knew all the salespeople. And Pappy passed away when I was 15 or 16, so I never really got to know him that well. But he always seemed to have a coat and tie on and a cigar, and his hunting dogs were always close by, and it was just kind of a fun, obviously a great time to grow up. And but this was nothing special. The bourbon business was just something just like selling, having dairy cows or milk or beef or whatever. It's just tobacco. It was just a natural thing to us. We appreciated as I got older, as I started to work at the distillery in the summer times for summer jobs, I realized how good it was because by that time had tasted other bourbons, and really realized at that point when I started working there and working in the cooper shop, and you take a bath sometimes in the whiskey because the pipe the hose that you fill the barrel back up with after you take it apart, sometime would pop loose and the bourbon would go all over you and smell like that going home. But it was just a distinctive smell and distinctive flavor, and I kind of figured we had something really special then.
He passed in 1965, is that correct?
Yep.
So he was alive to see bourbon, and in fact, I know he was a big part of the early push of getting bourbon, its early declaration of the United States to be a unique product to the United States. Do you recall a story or anything of him coming home of like, finally, bourbon has its international recognition, or?
No, because at that time that was 1964 when the Senate voted on that, and he was in ill health at that point. Last year of his life, he would come into the office a little bit, but he was wearing down. He was 90 years old, and there was no, I didn't know anything about that, to be honest with you, being 14 or 15. But
you had other things on your mind at that time.
Exactly, like where my dad was going to ship me off to school this week. But it was. We weren't really aware of the law and how special that law was, which now we greatly appreciate because this is America's spirit. And it's funny when I do seminars and talk to people about bourbon, what bourbon is, as far as what it's made of and the oak and so forth. It's the only thing that I can think of that has to be made in the U.S., which is pretty damn special.
Yeah.
Unless there's something else I don't know about.
There might be a cheese in Wisconsin, but in terms of a liquid, bourbon's the only thing.
Yeah.
So they open in 1935 on Derby Day, and Stitzel-Weller, in many respects, changed the game of distilleries then. What was so special about Stitzel-Weller that even to this day you have collectors searching estate sales for bottles?
Well, it was a conglomeration of things. It's a special place. It was my grandfather built it along with the help of his two partners, and right after Prohibition ended, and just the whole setup of the place with those pin oak trees going down Limestone Lane that shaded the certain areas of those warehouses right along when you drove in the place. And the employees, it was a family relationship amongst everybody. It was just incredible. And there's still people alive today that used to work for my dad, Carol Perry, who I think still works out there in the guard shack, kind of brought me up in the warehouse back in the day. But he's, it's just a great relationship, family style, just a great feeling. But the product they made was different than anybody else's in the industry, and that was obviously using wheated bourbon whiskey recipe, which was, nobody had done that.
As a
at
focus,
that point. Right?
Yeah, no one had focused just on a wheated bourbon recipe.
Right.
But there was also this rejection of technology at Stitzel-Weller, and in fact, your grandfather had quite a passion against chemists.
He did indeed. Matter of fact, I think they were from GE. He was taking him on a tour of the distillery, and they said, "Mr. Van Winkle, where's your lab?" They got these big fancy labs at GE for all these different products they would sell, and Pappy says, "Well, we don't have a lab. I've got a porcelain sink up there in the fermenter room where I test the pH factor of the mash tubs when it's fermenting, and we check the pH and the proof of the whiskey by hand, and we don't allow any chemist around here." And they said, "Well, Mr. Van Winkle, why don't you get a sign and put that up on the distillery door?" And sure enough, he did. So that's that famous sign that said "No chemist allowed." And it was just there's some of you all will get to try some of the whiskey tonight. In that bottle right there is a perfect example, the squatty bottle of what my family made before we sold the distillery in '72, but it was just a different level of whiskey, and people appreciated it, and we knew what we had, but too much competition from other type products out there with the light whiskeys and vodkas and Canadians and so forth. So it was a tough time to run a family business and keep it going, and but we knew we had a very special product, and people that knew the brand knew how special it was and different. And I've just kind of been doing the same old thing that I was bred with, so to speak.
So one of the great distillers of Stitzel-Weller was Will McGill, and his he believed in not having the human senses doing all the work, and that would be passed down from every Stitzel-Weller distiller up into Ed Foote. Mm-hmm. Did you pick up any of those old style techniques and tasting? Was there anything from that lineage of distillers at Stitzel-Weller that you took with you for picking out barrels? Or
I think most of it was just living and breathing it my whole life. I knew what I was brought up on, and obviously you like what you're brought up on because that's what you're used to. And that's what when we taste barrels even today, my son Preston and I, and the staff at Buffalo Trace that does that too. We look for that certain flavor profile that has always been in our family. But it was, Will would smell the new whiskey and rub it in his hands and get the salts in there and so forth. And if the whiskey's not good, you can smell the difference if it's not going to be a great whiskey just by using simple little tricks like that. And it's you need chemistry these days. I have to agree. You need that because there are certain things in the lab that you can do which really help your product. But the simple way to do it is also effective and obviously saleable and a great way to do it. But there are two ways to go about anything, I guess, and they just took the simple route, the more natural route as far as the quality of the whiskey.
If you could travel back in time to that 13 to 14-year-old self and say, all right, go back there and spend time, or whenever you could have spent time with Pappy, what would have been like the area that you would have liked to have learned more about with Pappy?
Actually, we don't know where the weeded idea came from. Is Mike Veach here? Did he come in? Okay. I've got a bottle of Old Fitzgerald that was made before Prohibition, I guess at the Old Frankfurt Distillery. Mm-hmm. But I would love to know where the idea came from, whether the Stitzel Distillery was making it at the time, or it came from the Fitzgerald Distillery in Frankfurt, when he bought the brand for $10,000 back in the day. Where the idea that to make your bourbon with wheat instead of rye, where he got that idea, because nobody really knows that for sure, and nothing was ever written down. All the recipes at Stitzel-Weller had corn and rye and malted barley. When you walk through the still, you'd see the percentages, or all the temperatures for cooking all the grains, and they put rye in there because they didn't want anybody to know it was wheat, because that was their secret recipe, which they did for a while. Obviously, they started to promote it after a while, but but I'd like to know where the idea came from, because that seems to be.
So we have been researching that. Like Mike and I, Mike Beach and I have talked about this a lot. And I found something in the 1800s of someone using it. Charles Nelson Distillery in Tennessee had a wheated bourbon recipe. So there's little snippets out there, but no one ever staked any kind of claim on it, like Stitzel-Weller did,
right? With
the Whisper of Wheat campaign that from the 1960s. So Weller that's actually going to be our first tasting here. This is the way we'll do the taste. Just pick it up and talk us. This is the Weller Antique 107 products. It's standard. You can find it in almost all your liquor stores. Now, a lot of people always want to know. Like now, you have this relationship with Buffalo Trace. This could potentially be Pappy Van Winkle in 10 years. How does that process work? Do you get to pick of the Buffalo Trace barrels of the wheated recipes, or how does that work?
It's the same recipe. The Weller and the Van Winkle whiskey is the same. Comes out of the same pipe, so to speak. Once, all during the year, twice, once in the spring, once in the fall, a bunch of Van Winkle barrels are made, a bunch of Weller barrels are made, and they're put in the warehouse. Now there's a computer program, a barrel model that we use to forecast for 10 to 23 years down the road. I don't know what you all do, but I bet if anybody's business plan is 23 years like mine is, that's a little different. But when you put a barrel in the warehouse, it's already designated when it's going to be bottled and for what product, whether it be 7 years for Weller, close to 7, or 12 for Weller, or the 10, 12, 15, 20, 23 like ours is. It's already designated what it's going to be. Now when we do bottle our whiskey, we taste every barrel, and if the one's not quite right, flavor profile's not quite right, we'll kick that one out, and they'll let it age further, or if it's just not right completely, they'll mix it in with something else. But we do get the first pick of all the wheated barrels.
And do they send you samples, like lab samples, or are you going in there and pulling straight from the barrel?
No, that would be a very dirty and awful job. I've worked in the warehouse a lot, and you don't want to get close to those barrels. They're filthy. That's what you pay somebody $18 an hour to do. No, they come in a little. It's funny, when I first hooked up with Buffalo Trace in 2002, so it'll be 14 years this June. Can't believe it's been that long. They would send a full 200 ml bottle. They'd fill the 200 ml bottle and send it to the lab. It'd have the distillation date on there and a barrel number. So they would number each barrel head with a number so they could keep track of that sample. And they'd pour them in, they water them down to about 40 proof in the lab. So we'll taste them on this circular table and just taste them and rate them and kick them out or accept them as they go along. But I said after a while, I hate it because they have to throw that whiskey out. Once they pour the little couple of ounces in a glass, they'd pour it out. And I said, you got to be kidding me. We don't, this stuff is rare. Back then, 14 years ago, we weren't, selling like we were today as far as the popularity, but I still hated to see good whiskey thrown down the drain.
Any volunteers? Would anyone welcome their pallets to help Mr. Van Winkle here?
Unfortunately, the government makes you do that. as we know, the government doesn't have a great answer about everything. But so eventually they started putting this much in each of those bottles, which I can sleep better at night. So they threw about this much away every night instead of 3/4 of a bottle. But they send the samples to the lab.
How's the quality and the and consistency that you're getting from Buffalo Trace in comparison to Stitzel-Weller?
The consistency is better than anybody as far as being very consistent. Because what we were dealing with at Stitzel-Weller was I was able to buy whiskey from Diageo or the United Distillers or whoever owned it at the time, and there's no telling where those barrels were stored in the warehouse. They would just sell them to me, willy-nilly, so to speak. So there would be some really hot barrels from the top floors, and the really nice barrels were kind of in the middle to the cooler floors. So the ones that got really hot, the whiskey would too much wood and get too woody, and that would definitely be a no-no. So we would kick those out. But you can tell the difference in those barrels, and it wasn't so much the quality of the barrel and so forth. It was just where they were stored. We have a more consistent level of where we want our whiskey to be stored now, so it's going to be very consistent, where it wasn't, it hadn't been in the past from the other two distilleries we draw from.
Okay. I want to go back to where we left off a little bit ago.
By the way, can I make a suggestion? I don't know, y'all probably have been to whiskey tastings before, but I always suggest to taste it neat like this, which is the bottling proof. That's 107 proof, and maybe put a few drops of water in there and see how it changes. It's just kind of an educational thing, and it changes whiskey completely. It hides the alcohol some and opens it up quite a bit, and you've got a totally different product when you put a few drops of water in there, which you should do with any whiskey.
And this is actually one of the great mixing products for cocktails. When Pappy passed away, your father takes over, and he's a World War II commander, tank commander, kind of an iron fist of some sorts. Did he bring some of those military principles over into the distillery?
He brought them to raising his son, I will tell you that. I caught quite a bit of that. But yeah, he was very diligent and straightforward and knew exactly what he wanted, and he ran the company kind of with an iron fist and didn't put up with a whole lot, but also was a great friend to every salesman that he had. And I was just kind of leafing through Sally's book, the Pappy book that she wrote, and talking about the salespeople's relationship with him and everybody that ran the company, being my Uncle King and, of course, Pappy also. But he grew great respect from the employees and so forth. But he was a very stern individual, I'll say that.
To this day, the people who worked for him who are still with us, I've talked to, said he was one of the greatest men they ever knew.
He was. I mean, he just had a zillion friends. I mean, you can kind of tell when somebody passes away in the size of their funeral, how many people show up. His was crowded. I mean, Mitch McConnell was nice enough to have a policeman there at Second Pres and Indian Hills area, Rolling Fields, and because there was just cars everywhere around there during the service. But had a lot of people show up, and but he had a lot of friends, and didn't have you meet the guy and he's your buddy. So it's kind of a good guy to work for, I'm sure.
And you all. You went away from being the child not falling in line at attention when you should be to being his business partner. What was that relationship like, working with your father selling whiskey?
It was an eye-opener for me because even though I've grown up with the guy my whole life, working for him was one thing, and it was great. I mean, he was, he'd give me books to read, and he'd write letters after letter of how things should be, and those salesman ideas to be a good salesman and so forth. So it was, he was by the book. He was still being a captain in the Army, I think. He was just bam, 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 this is the way you do things, and had a certain way to do things, but always fair, and it was a great experience because The business, the only part about it was the business was not great back then. When I joined him with the decanter, that was the best way to sell whiskey, was in a fanciful decanter, so to speak, which was a lot of fun. And we made a lot of money. Those things made a lot of money as far as selling a bottle versus a decanter versus just a bottle of whiskey, because you got a whole lot more for it because of the design of it and so forth. But it was a lot of fun working for him. It really was.
So in 1972, which I'm sure is a difficult year for your family, Stitzel-Weller is sold. What was the mood? Take us back in that time with the Van Winkles.
I was still in college, just getting out, as a matter of fact. My sister, Sally, was going through the divorce of her first husband, and Kitty, my other sister, was up in New England, where she had settled. Well, actually, she was in Virginia because she was married, and her husband was in business school at UVA. So Dad didn't bring any of this home. All these negotiations, we really didn't know anything about it. My mother may have, but it was something that was just never talked about. It's just, people say, what happened? Why'd you all sell the distillery? Well, we had some family stockholders, and there's also a couple of banks, or Louisville Trust, I think, was the bank that Earl Muir was running, and the Farnsley family were stockholders for obvious reasons, and Dad's sister Rip McClure was the other side, and her husband King, who worked with Dad, had already retired, so the business wasn't doing great. They had kept the thing going during the war and spent some money, and then 50s and 60s, they had to spend money on the distillery to keep it up, the upkeep. So they had to replace fermenters and fix things, and things were just kind of wired together there at Stitzel-Weller. So it didn't have the cash to do that. So therefore, the dividend check wasn't great. So, there was just, he was really being forced to sell. He didn't want to, probably would have had to anyway, regardless, except he just didn't want to. So he just didn't bring that home. He was kind of close to the vest on stuff like that, because he didn't want to, have us feeling bad. And I'm sure my mother knew something about it, but he didn't really bring it home. So we didn't really know anything about it until it really happened.
Wow. That's a tank commander for you.
Yep.
Keeping it from his troops.
Exactly. Yep.
Did he ever share with you what that was like afterward?
Just the fact that it about killed him, and we could tell that, because after doing this after he got out of Princeton in 1937, he worked for my grandfather and became treasurer of the company before the war, and worked at the distillery. So there's a fellow doing a book on bourbon people back in the day that were in the military, or are in the military still today, and he's putting together all these letters and information from families. And he was just here a few weeks ago, and it's going to be a while before he gets out, before it comes out, because he's still in the Army. He's a JAG at one of the bases, I think, in North Carolina, and we sent him letters. My father wrote my grandfather letters. He got wounded in November of 1944, so he was laid up on the bed for a couple months. So he wrote a lot of letters, and half of the letters are, hope you're treating Mother right, Pappy's wife, because he was very concerned about make sure you treat her nice and tell her happy birthday and so forth and this and that. And also, then even the other half of the letter would be, how's the business going? I read about this distiller and so and all this. So it was half business, half personal.
Wow.
Sitting over there in the bed in the Philippines, but still very concerned about the business. But also was not happy that it wasn't out on the battlefield with his buddies. Yeah. But he hated it. When he sold the place, it was not good, and he had to get right back in it. But, that was his life, so it was pretty rough.
And so he decided to get right back into, start his own company to sell whiskey?
Yep, he got an office, which I still have now. It's the same building. We've moved a little bit down the hall for a little bigger space, but they're on Brownsboro Road, and it's hired a secretary, Lois Devlin, and gradually got some ideas. The old Rip Van Winkle label was a pre-prohibition label that Dad actually bought years, back in the 50s.
I actually found an 1868 reference to that.
Oh, really?
It was an old rectified brand.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
I think it was made by Barton's, owned by somebody and bottled in Missouri somewhere, because I've got some of the old Rip Van Winkle pre-prohibition pints that have all that information.
But it was a rectified whiskey of stature, so it wasn't one of the tobacco spit ones. It was,
right.
it was actually a good rectified whiskey.
Oh, that's good. I tasted some. Mike and I have tasted one out of that pint bottle, and it's pretty bad. It's a 4-grain. It's actually got, I think, oats in it.
That's a possibility.
So anyway, the bottle I tasted wasn't that great, so I'm anxious to try another one. But he bought the brand and never used it. He was going to. I got some potential designs he was going to use from the old Rip Van Winkle label with Stitzel-Weller whiskey back before we sold the distillery, but never got around to doing it. He did one decanter of an old Rip Van Winkle figurine, and that was about it. So he had the label, and he was able to buy back some whiskey that he had made at Stitzel-Weller. So after about, I think, 3 years, he kind of got back into it.
And when did you start working with him?
1977. So, and I got right into it with going out on the road and selling the decanters mostly. The whiskey was kind of a sideline. They weren't selling a whole lot because nobody cared about older bourbon whiskey. It was 7 years old back then, which is what he bought from the Norton Simon people that we had sold to. So it was, I joined him in 77, and it was a battle to sell decanters with, but the whiskey was the best part about them, but nobody realized it back then. Had some excellent whiskey in those bottles. That's why if you see them on the internet or whatever, the price is kind of prohibitive now, but back in the day it was pretty good.
I think
deal.
I've seen one that went for $10,000 once. I've seen them go for a lot.
It's nuts.
And you put anything with the Van Winkle name to it, and the auction houses go a little crazy. So in researching your family's history, one of the things that your father said in an interview in the 1970s was basically never bottle as much as you think you can sell. And here's an example. If you think you can sell 7,000 bottles, only bottle 5,000. And that seems to be like a sales mentality developed very early on. And we see that today with the Van Winkle line. Tell us about that strategy of kind of leaving them wanting more that the Van Winkle family has developed over the years.
It's just a kind of a natural thing. If you have, there's still a lot of cases like that, with different products all around the world these days. But Pappy always believed in that. If you make a really good product, which has to be good from the get-go, you can't just come up with something and have this philosophy of, okay, we could sell 10,000 cases today, but we're only going to release 5,000 or 8,000 and keep it in short supply. If it's not any good, people aren't going to come knocking on your door to want some. The demand won't be there.
Now, perhaps this is the other side, as people get angry. And maybe angry is not the right word.
They do get angry.
They get angry. They can't find a bottle of Van Winkle. And if they bought it 10, 15 years ago and they can't find it now, they're even more irate. Mm-hmm. Do you sometimes look at that family strategy and say, maybe we just need to relax that a little bit?
We're not. They actually, my dad and grandfather and Uncle King did, keep the supplies low in certain situations. Obviously, they were trying to sell more whiskey all the time, but keep it interesting, keep your demand up. Now, with our products, since we hooked up with Buffalo Trace, there has never been one day where we haven't sold every case available in the warehouse. We sell every drop we have. So people just think we're holding back product because that's the way it's been for years with maybe the Van Winkles or the Stitzel-Weller product or whatever. But it's just happening naturally. We're not trying to hold back inventory. We're selling everything we have. So it just seems like we're holding back inventory to keep prices high and demand up.
Do you think it's sometimes inflated because of everyone has access to phones and they go in the store and the social media and the blogs and those damn whiskey writers are always talking about it?
Yeah, this whole internet thing and the communication that everybody has these days with everyone instantly, whether it be pictures or words or whatever, it makes it that much harder to deal with, and it's a lot trickier.
How would Pappy have dealt with social media?
Well, he'd be spinning right now in his grave, I know, thinking about that. But I don't know. He was a great. He was a good people person. He would probably love it actually, with all this.
One of the pioneers of the advertorial, So he probably would have found a way to sell whiskey on it.
Yep, I think so. But he had a great knack of presenting his products and selling them in a certain manner, and his little third column ads that he had in magazines for years and years, and tells little anecdotal stories of Kentucky history and individuals and how he compared that to selling whiskey and so forth. It was kind of a fun thing. He had a lot of fun with it.
So you're selling the decanters in the 1970s. Demand is going down for bourbon. It is a horrible time. Everyone's getting out, going into something called vodka or tequila. There's a subtle push to go into a light whiskey category. And there you all are, kind of a very small group, pushing whiskey in the 1980s. What was that like, trying to sell Van Winkle bourbon when nobody wanted bourbon? What was that like?
It was tough. There would be days when I would think, what am I going to do when this doesn't work out? Because we were trying to source whiskey from different distilleries, and everybody was back then. Bulk whiskey was a popular thing amongst many distilleries, and everybody was, if you had excess whiskey and it was a good product, you could sell whiskey by the barrel, and people would put their names on it and so forth, which is basically what we were doing. We made the original whiskey, but we would have to buy and supply product.
So what were the distilleries you were buying from then?
We originally Dad bought from a place called the Old Boone Distillery, which was down past Shively, south of Shively, which is long gone back in the 70s. But actually, Bill Pageant used to work there. He worked at Maker's Mark for a while. But they were friends, so Bill arranged for him to buy some whiskey, and I bought some Old Boone barrels from Wild Turkey. So Wild Turkey was in a situation where their brand was growing like crazy in the 60s and 70s, and he couldn't make enough there at their distillery in Lawrenceburg, so they were buying bulk whiskey from all over. So I bought some Old Boone from them, and then I bought some. Dad was good friends with Buddy Thompson at Glenmore. Mm-hmm. A lot of our decanter whiskey was 7-year-old 86 proof Glenmore whiskey, which was really good. I originally thought that's what was in this bottle, these squatty bottles, but I checked my records today, and it is Stitzel-Weller. But we did have some very good whiskey from Yellowstone, because it was made very similarly to the Stitzel-Weller formula. As far just the rye recipe was different, but really good whiskey, and that's about it. And then we went to Stitzel-Weller after that, when it used to be 100% Stitzel-Weller. But those were the 3 or 4 that we used.
Okay. So if a collector was to want to try and trace your whiskey, how could they find out where the source of origin of the whiskey in the bottle from that time
They'd have to call me, and I'd have to go through my bottling cards from Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, from 1983 to 2002, and trace it back, which I do. Seems like once a week somebody will call up and say, Sean Brock or some whiskey freak will call up and say, I found this bottle in Europe or in Japan. What was it? I've never seen it. And I had a lot of different things I was doing in Lawrenceburg for a lot of different people, private label and so forth. So.
And you own the Old Hoffman.
Yeah, that's where I bought the Old Hoffman Distillery, which was just a bottling house and a warehouse. Stored the barrels there, and the bottling facility was there.
And that had had some structural issues and leaked and.
Just a nightmare. Just leaky roofs and an old 1970 Dodge truck that I would go down the warehouse and pick up the barrels, which was about a half a mile, and just making it that half a mile was tough. But I learned a lot about leaky roofs and working on an old truck and mechanical stuff. And I was doing it all myself mostly because a lot of the people that worked there were starting to retire, and that's when I grabbed Preston right out of Kentucky when he graduated in 2001. The day after he got out, he was down there helping me process whiskey and so forth. But it did its job. It was it would lose money. I would make money selling whiskey, but I would lose money at the old
facility.
Commonwealth Distillery on the bottling side of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it kept the brand going, and it did its thing. It did its job. Thankfully, Buffalo Trace knocked on the door a few years later and got me out of the bottling business.
So let's go to our next tasting. This is Weller Special Reserve. It's low room proof, typically around 6-7 years old. They used to have a age statement on there. It's no longer there. This is good and inexpensive sipping whiskey.
That's what I buy, if I can find it. It's hard to find. I guess they'll blame that on me too. But it's a younger version of our whiskey, but it's still very good.
Do you ever Google yourself to see how much you're getting blamed?
No, you don't want to. I'm just tired of that. I'm over it. I got tired of bad internet stuff out there, and finally just quit reading it because you can't do anything about it. You can lash back at people, but then it just gets ugly.
Yeah. But when you were even at the state you are now, where people are upset that they can't get your product, it still has to be better than losing money in a leaking roof.
It is. I have no right to complain at all. It was, that I've been on the side where I was in the decanter business myself after Dad passed away, and that's what, again, unless you buy just the right amount, you're just right. It's great, but if you buy too many decanters, you get stuck with them, and then years later you got to throw them in the dumpster or sell them for $1 a piece or something like that. So, the bank's knocking on the door wanting their interest payment. So this is definitely, a people pleaser. I'm a people pleaser. I really do want the people to get what they want,
right.
And it's just natural. So not being able to make everybody happy and go out and sell the product, because I don't even get to sell anymore. I'm not a salesman anymore. I'm a non-salesman. So it's a very different lifestyle than what we have now. Now it's just kind of managing the brand.
You were much more than a salesman, though. I mean, you were the guy tasting one barrel and saying it would taste great in a batch with this barrel and that barrel. So you did a lot more than just selling. You were mingling or blending.
Don't say blend. We don't say blend in Kentucky. We say mingle. Yeah, they do that in
that's
Canada.
for those Canadian. And we do have people in here from Canada, so
right.
Be careful on your blend hate there,
That's
Julian.
fine. They can use that word all they want to, but no, it's just kind of when you're brought up in Kentucky, the word blend is not for whiskey. But it was. I mean, I just like what I like, and it so happens that other people like what I like too. That's the way I see it. So,
does Preston have that same palate kinship with the consumers?
He does. He's got a lot better palate than I do, and actually, my wife has the best palate, but she's not a big whiskey drinker. But if I want to bounce something off her, I'll take it home. Like our rye whiskey, when we first produced that, that's her favorite thing. And I said, try this. It's Charles Medley made it in 1984. I think it's pretty good. And she tasted it and just blew her mind. It was just great. But yeah, he definitely picked up the palate thing. Unfortunately, when you get older, your sense of smell kind of goes, and your palate maybe gets worn out a little bit. But I guess I'll still have enough of it to tell the really good stuff from the stuff that's not going to pass.
I think you're fine. You're probably you probably still outtaste everyone else. In the room,
I don't know.
So.
I think you probably can describe a whole lot more stuff than I can.
Was there ever a point during the leaky roofs or the losing money that you decided you were thinking about hanging it up?
No, because as I mentioned, I didn't know how to do anything else. I sold clothes at Rhodes Rapier here in Louisville when I got out of school for...
They sell ascots, by the way.
I know. You must know Mr. Hines over there. Yeah. I worked with that guy, but they were great people, but they wanted to kind of move me up and be a buyer and so forth. And I said, well, this is great, but I don't think I want to be in the clothing business my whole life. And Dad at the same time had said, do you want to come work for me? So it had been 4 or 5 years that I'd done that, and it was great. But it's funny, he said, why don't you meet some friends? And I actually met with some of them in the banking business or in the insurance company and talked to them, because we never know if this thing's going to work or not. This was 1970, late 70s, and I said, okay, I'll check that out. Of course, I never wanted to work in a bank or sell insurance, but very lucrative, some of it is. But I was, found what I wanted to do, and thankfully it worked out. But if it all fell through, I just was going to ride this thing to the grave, so to speak. And I was really lucky. Had a lot of help with a lot of different people, little pieces here from marketing people and people that told me, that suggested I use that particular. It's a stock cognac bottle is what we use. That was Gordon Hugh up in Covington, who owned the Cork and Bottle. His family used to own the Cork and Bottle up there. Suggested I use that bottle because I bottled his Hirsch whiskey in that. So anyway, all these little pieces of help from this and that and this and that, because this is nothing I did by myself. Believe me, I had a lot of help, and just very thankful it all kind of worked out.
What was the moment where you said, "We've arrived. We're no longer just scraping by. We're here"?
Well, I guess getting Sazerac's attention, and when Mark Brown first called me and said, "Do you want to do a little joint JV?" he called it. I was going, "What's a JV?" Joint venture. And I said, "No, I'm fine. This is very comfortable. We're doing this as far as the way things are going, because it wasn't. I had a nice brand. We were starting to sell the older whiskey. I'd come out with a 23-year-old, and it was getting very good ratings and well received. And but then I thought about it for a few weeks and said, well, let's see. Stitzel-Weller's closed in 1992, and I'm running out of whiskey, and we're not going to be able to buy whiskey forever. So I'm going to need somebody to make whiskey for me. And they've got Weller, and they've been making it since the late 80s, early 90s. And I think this probably will work out. So
and they also acquired the Weller stocks from United Distillers during the purchase of Weller.
Right.
And
so
did they say they would allow you access to those stocks?
Yeah, that's part of the deal. So we got a little bit of that, and that's really, they've been very nice. One of the reasons Weller is so short, because they've given some of that stock to let us use it. Probably a financial decision also that they did that, but they were willing to help us out, and it worked out great. But beyond that, I think when Fortune magazine kind of came on, a friend of mine, John Huey, who was the editor-in-chief at Time Incorporated, I think they owned Fortune. Was it Fortune or Forbes? I think it was Fortune. I was an article in there, and then the Garden and Gun thing came out, and then the chefs started talking about it, and the more ratings, and being on TV shows and in movies that we didn't even know about, and it all just kind of built and built and built.
So you're saying that the rise was actually more 2010 than 2004?
Well, the meteoric rise, I guess, has been more lately, in the last 5-6 years. But it was all kind of gradually took off, when we started hooking up with Buffalo Trace. Of course, they had a national sales force to help our products, and they produced more. They had more inventory. We're making more whiskey, by the way, than we ever have, and we do every year. But it just takes 10 to 23 years for you guys can ever see it. Sorry, but it's a crazy business. People don't understand it a lot when they say, "Well, aren't you making more?" Yes, I promise.
We do everything we can to educate them, but
it doesn't work. They're all vodka mentality out there.
Yeah, well, we are Americans. We want it
right.
now.
They want it now.
And now that we're social media generation, it's even worse. So, I want to talk about another brand for a second, in Maker's Mark. There are two stories out there as to where Bill Samuels got his recipe. One is that your grandfather, Pappy, and and their distiller at the time, gave Bill Samuels the recipe. The other is that they worked with Bill Samuels to come up with what is Maker's Mark. And over the years, when Maker's Mark had their proof debacle, you tweeted about that, saying Pappy would be rolling in his grave right now. So what story is true, and just talk us through that relationship with Maker's Mark?
Well, it was really a relationship between my grandfather and Bill Samuels Sr., who were good friends. And as you know, Bill sold T.W. Samuels back in 43 or 50 something, or 40, early 40s. Sold the brand, got out of the business for 10 years, and then bought Star Hill and wanted to start this new brand. And I think it's a combination of the Samuels doing their own thing, and obviously the red wax and the seal and everything is all their idea. But I think Bill Samuels Sr. and Pappy were such good friends that I think he's asked Pappy for some suggestions on, I want to make a good bourbon whiskey. And what would Pappy tell him? Well, we've got a good yeast formula and we use wheat. And this is the way we grind our grain, and this is what our stills look like. And that was all kind of replicated at Maker's Mark. So I wasn't there. I'm just kind of going by what I have read and heard and so forth from Bill Samuels himself and Sally, my sister, who did a lot of research for her book and so forth. But I think it's a combination of the two families kind of getting together to create it. They had to make the decision on what they wanted to do, but I can't imagine as similar as Maker's Mark was to Stitzel-Weller in a miniature version. It seemed to be that they took a lot of Pappy's suggestions to create that brand.
Did you know United Distillers tried to buy Maker's Mark in '82? When they eventually sold to Hiram Walker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a history there beyond Pappy and Bill Samuels.
Mm-hmm.
You had a bottle. I want to say it was from the '80s. You used to dip in red wax. Was it in the '80s or the '90s?
Yeah, '84 when I bottled it. I got a letter from Mr. Samuels' lawyer. I got it framed in my office. Cease and desist. I didn't know they owned the trademark. I just copied it. Actually, it was Gordon Hughes I did up in Covington that said, well, because we're doing some things for him too. But you could dip the wax and let it drip. So there wasn't, you could dip it in there, but you could let it drip down the bottle. That was the trademark part. But I liked it, so I just copied it. And they didn't take it. They didn't cotton to that too much.
Every now and then I see one of those bottles pop up. And
it's some of the best whiskey on the planet. It was 14 and 16 years old, and really good. We bottled it one shot. So when they said cease and desist, I had already done that because I sold it all. You didn't
even fight it. You were like,
no. I said that's fine. I said I wrote right back and I said, yep, no problem, because we'd sold everything we had, and we weren't. It was a limited number of barrels that I had saved that Dad had bought from Stitzel-Weller in 1968 and 1970 distillation, and I bottled them in '84, and they were spectacular. So that stuff is really quite rare and quite good. But if you taste that, compared to stuff today, it's whiskey today. It's a different level.
Well, I think that's a good segue to taste what was made yesterday. The only exception there were those who have the 15-year-old Pappy, which I think that's probably one of the top 10. The 15-year-old is my favorite expression of the Pappy line.
Yep, mine too.
And to me, that's the one that won World's Best Bourbon a couple years ago in San Francisco, which I'm a judge on. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the 10 best bourbons that's been created in this century. So if you have that, don't feel bad. You still have great bourbon. So let's go to the very special whiskey. Some of you will have Weller distilled in the 70s, bottled in the 80s. Some of you will have the 68 or 1970 distilled Stitzel-Weller whiskey and aged in 1984.
Bottled in 80.
Bottled in 84, not
84, 85,
bottled
something
in
like
84. And then some of you will have the Pappy Van Winkle 15-year-old. And this is one of those moments where I'm just going to shut up, and we're all just going to smell and taste and enjoy a little piece of Van Winkle history.
Is that the Weller? Or is that that one?
This is Weller. I've got
the old like that one.
I got that one there. And, yeah. Smell it.
That's good. It's got a little heat to it. So that one was bottled in what did we decide, in the mid-'80s, probably, because that bottle mold said 80-something on there.
Yeah, that does have some heat to it.
Especially when you compare it to this.
Yeah. Looks like we might have is someone here with you? We have a spare glass up here.
Could sell that seat for a lot of money right now.
Is someone there with you all? If you all want to come up here, there's a spare glass. The gentleman in the back there.
Proof on what exactly?
Was it the Weller? For the Weller? I want to say it was 90, but I'm going to take a look right now. Yeah, it's 90.
Dale, you probably know, but that's probably got a mixture of older whiskeys and younger whiskeys in there because it was bottled in the 80s. So just let's get rid of this old whiskey and put it in with this new whiskey because the old whiskey's no good. Or we can't sell it for any money. Actually, I have a funny story about a banker. I was trying to buy some bulk whiskey, and I fought to get cash all the time. My rear end is still on the line, I think, for some of these loans. But I called up Max Shapiro and said, do you have any banks in Bardstown that would want to lend some guy some money to buy barrels with? He said, yeah, Wilson Muir. And at that time, they were a little bank in Bardstown, I think. So I called up the boss down there, and I wanted to borrow a certain amount of money. And he said, well, what are you going to secure this with? I said, well, how about if I just give you a note that says, if I don't pay you back or whatever, you can have these 20-year-old barrels. It was from 20-year-old barrels, and it could have been the original Pappy barrels that I bought. And he wrote back, and he said, what do I want with a bunch of 20-year-old whiskey barrels? Why would I possibly want that? So I don't know if he's still around, but I'm kind of laughing right now at that.
Well, what's funny is, I'm surprised Max didn't just send you to his bank, because or maybe they're,
It probably was his bank, as a matter of fact. I don't know.
So I trust everyone's had a good taste of a little bit of history. Looks like we've got a little bit left here, so when we conclude and with the questions, we'll pour until they're drained dry. No? Never mind. Never mind, we won't do that.
That was a no.
That was a negatron. So when we look at how far you've come, do you have a moment where you're looking at like a long line, or you're seeing the buzz on TV where you're just like, wow, we made it. I mean, I know we talked about the culmination in the rise, but have you ever had just a personal moment of gratification?
I think it's now to see what the whiskey is doing. I want to know what I can do now, because we've created this monster, so to speak. It's a great monster, but it is a monster, and it's growing and growing and growing, and the demand keeps growing, and the aftermarket prices on our whiskey is ridiculous, and we're trying to do something with illegal sales like that.
Does that bother you?
Yeah, I don't know why it should, but because some guy's making $2,000 a bottle, and I'm splitting $50 with Buffalo Trace. That shouldn't bother me.
Well, you could always, have you guys entertained the idea of raising your MSRP or to the distillery, or?
We could, but someday this whiskey thing is all going to come crashing, or may quit someday, and we'd be stuck with higher prices and nobody's going to buy it. Been there, done that. No, thank you. But we try to be conservative, and we're not going to. We have people been buying our whiskey very loyally for years, and now they can't find it, but if they can, they're still willing to pay for it. And I'm not going to have them walk into a store one day and say, "Oh my God, that bottle's $100 or $300 where it used to be $85." I'm not going to do that to them. So we just kind of be very conservative about it, and I want to sleep at night. I can't get away with that. But it would put a halt to that, or somewhat, but who knows? Maybe not.
So I do know that the KDA is working on like an antique spirits proposition for next year. Let's say if someone legally buys a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, and then it is then legal for them to resell it on an auction market for $5,000 to $10,000 to someone in China. It's all legal now. I mean, it's not at the moment, but let's say it is. It happens. Will you then maybe reconsider, the pricing structure? Because then you have a legal channel that is effectively keeping that, keeping $50 in your pocket while they earn $4,950 or whatever it may be. But there's money. There's a lot of money changing hand for your whiskey.
Is it sold legally?
Sometimes.
If you don't have a liquor license, you can't buy it.
Sometimes it is sold legally. You have liquor stores selling it for anywhere, $6,000.
That's fine if they have a license to do it. That's great. I'm talking about individuals.
Okay.
Like on Craigslist. That's illegal. Y'all probably do that all the time, but I don't like it. Well, it's just I would think the states and the attorneys general would get mad about that, because it's tax money. Well, I guess the states already got the tax because they bought it somewhere. So anyway.
But to be clear, you're really only concerned about non-licensed liquor sales. That's your only concern on that.
Yeah, it's illegal. I would think somebody would care about that, but nobody does. They're bigger fish to fry, I guess.
Counterfeit's also an issue in other parts of the world and everything, and here. So what is the future of Old Rip Van Winkle and Pappy?
We're just going to keep plugging away and making more whiskey, and hopefully cut down on this demand some, or at least supply more, so that'll take care of some of the demand. But nothing tremendously new, and that we can't. It's frustrating because we can't really come up with any new projects because we have so little product to sell right now. And why come up with something new when you have brands that you can't, nobody can find any of it at this point. So we're just kind of hold off on that. But I think the future is great for down the road, but right now we're just trying to fill in the supply and fill some holes.
Is it true you're going to come out with a flavored Pappy Van Winkle line?
Apple flavored. Cinnamon apple.
Cinnamon apple, fantastic. Will it be a wheated recipe or a rye?
I think weeded. Go ahead and mess it up completely. Yeah.
Nice.
Put some cinnamon in there too.
Well, Julian, it's been an absolute honor for me to sit up here and ask you questions. As I said from the top of this, you're easily, in my estimation, one of the top 5 people for bringing bourbon back. And as we heard tonight, you had to work pretty hard to bring, your family's heritage back. And I salute you for that, sir.
Thank you.
Cheers.
It's a pleasure. Thank you all for coming.
And so with that, we will happily open it up for questions prior to our auction. Mr. Eric Brown will be running around with the mic. We have one right over here.
Well, people call our 10-year-old and our 12-year-old and our rye Pappy Van Winkle whiskey. It's not. We specifically have a 15-year, a 20, and a 23-year-old with Pappy's picture on the label with a cigar, and either the dog's on the back or I'm on the back or somebody else, or he was as a young man. But the 20-year was the first Pappy Van Winkle label, and that was roughly 95, I think, 94, 95, 96. Again, I have to look at my little hand-scribbled cards. My girl Friday down in Lawrenceburg, Darlene Gillis, who was my one-man band secretary down there, who took care of all the bottling records and everything. And I've kept those cards, and they're great. I'm so glad I kept them because they've got all that history between 80, 83, and 2002 of when everything was bottled and what was bottled and where it went and so forth. But came up with that label when I saw a picture of Pappy in a file in my basement that someone had taken years ago. So I said, well, let's honor him with a 20-year-old because I had some 20-year-old whiskey that I'd bought from Old Boone Distillery or from Wild Turkey. But about mid-90s was when the first one came out. And then the next one was the 23-year-old 3 years after that because I had some extra 20-year-old that was 23 years old when I had it. So and I tried that, and I said, wow, this is really good. So that's the main reason I bottled it. If it had been over the hill, I wouldn't have touched it, but it was very good.
Good question. We have one right back here. And after that, Eric, we have a lady right here.
This is great.
Good.
So when you talk about the negative impact of the full state economy, but clearly the scale is tilted more towards the positive for the room and USA and all over the world. I'm curious to know what kind of role, if any, the positivity that New York Rise implemented has taken on in your family. How would you handle this?
Well, I was in Costco 2 days ago. We actually had a few cases end up in Costco a few years ago. Our distributor sold them here in Kentucky by mistake, and I was really angry at them because they probably sold it.
I wish I'd have known.
Yeah.
Jeez, I got.
No, it was back when you could find it back then. This was several years ago. So the checkout lady, I was just getting one thing because I forgot it the other day, and it was some prescription thing I needed. And she said, "Hello, Mr. Van Winkle. I saw you on TV the other day." And she had seen my card, my Costco card. And I said, "Oh, really? What was I doing?" She said, "Gosh, let me think." And, it was Sean Brock in The Mind of a Chef when he was with David Chang, and they were at the distillery drinking White Dog at 9:30 in the morning by the glass at 125 proof. And and she said that, "Oh, yeah, that was fun. That was fun. I appreciate you saying something about that." But when you can't hide at Costco, I think it's a different level. We're all kind of blown away by it. My whole family is. Sometimes, we're again honored that people think I'm some stature of popularity that they want to take a picture or whatever. But it's great. But we're not used to it at all. I'm pretty simple guys. You can probably figure out from talking to me, but it's nice, and I'm honored that people think that way. And they're, when I see somebody like that, I want. We were just in New York last week at the A Night to Remember, which is Cigar Aficionado puts on to raise money for the Prostate Cancer Foundation that Michael Milliken started. And Rudy Giuliani was there. I got my picture with Rudy and Michael Milliken and a bunch of other heavy hitters up there were there. So it was kind of fun. But we donated some whiskey for that event, which went for $60,000, by the way. So that was kind of cool. People ask me what's going on, what's so great now, because we're doing good with the whiskey, and it's come to such a situation where events like this, and raising money for disease and charities, and the Derby Museum and stuff like that. The tremendous amount of money that it's raising is really very gratifying. So it's pretty cool. That's great.
And your daughters have started an online merchandising company.
Yeah, they wanted to get in the business. It was too small for them or their husbands to be in. I've got 3 girls, along with Preston, and they're all married. And but the business is too small to have anybody work for us, because especially now, since Preston and I can pretty much do it very easily with Chris Comstock down at Buffalo Trace. But they started this brand called PappyCo.com. And they sell barrel furniture and hats and T-shirts and bourbon balls and needlepoint flask and belts. If you see my belt, it's pretty cool. Old Rip Van Winkle belts, and it's a lot of fun. They're doing great with it. Pappy Van Winkle cigars. They've come out with this company called Drew Estates has helped them with that. So it's all become very popular, and so now we kind of got everybody in the business. So that's really neat.
They sell books too. They do everything bourbon related.
They sell your book if it's bourbon. Yeah, they've done well with Mike's book. So talk to them. You go and work a deal. I think Mike sold quite a few books through there.
I acquired a bottle through my mother also state. I'm not sure it's Stitzel-Weller. It still has a tax stamp on it. Is there a way to tell how old it might be?
There is a way to. We could all look at it here and see what it is and take a look at it and tell you pretty soon. Or if it's a kind of somewhere between the late 70s and 90s, or depends on what the tax stamp looks like. There's a mold number on the bottom or a date the mold was made, the bottle was made. This kind of gives you a rough idea when it was bottled. It's going to be a 2-digit number with a circle around it. And but again, just looking at it can kind of instantly tell us what decade it's in. But beyond that specifically, it gets a little tricky.
So under the Reagan administration, they did away with the tax stamps as a requirement on bottles. So they started to disappear. I don't actually know what year they disappeared completely on the United Distiller products. We actually have one of the people in this audience who was in charge of that. What year did United Distillers stop using strip stamps on their Weller products, Dale? We'll come back. Do you know? No.
About 85,
it's probably
mid-80s.
It's probably
85, 87,
86.
something like that. Yeah.
If it's a green stamp, then it's from like the 60s. But again, like you were saying, like there's a lot of things we could look at it on, but you're almost surefire 80s.
Yeah, okay. Tamper evident cap too, which is put on about that same time. Bottle and bond back in the day used to have the distillation date and the bottling date on there, so it was real easy to pick that out. That would be a green stamp though. So Weller probably had a red stamp. Yeah, but again, those are some of the clues. Bring it over. I'll take a look at it.
This is like what I do for fun, looking at stamps. So. We have to look at those bottle records. You should post those online so all of us geeks can get on there and just look at them.
You come over and put them online. You can do that. Stack about that thick.
Done. Actually, your daughters could sell it on PappyCo. I guarantee it. That so. Just say you touched it, and then it'd go for
Right.
it'd sell for 5,000. One more. Oh, hey, Fred.
Yeah, the first 20-year was rye bourbon, made by Old Boone. So here I am promoting wheated bourbon whiskey, and the one that got a really high rating, has kind of made me famous, was Old Boone made with a rye recipe. It wasn't my favorite, but other people liked it, and it was good. But yeah, that's probably the only one I'm thinking. There's one other where we had in there with the 23-year-old that went overseas. I can't tell you what country, but they didn't notice that it was anything different than anything else. So they drink a lot of bourbon over there. Somewhere far east, I think. We don't sell anything in the Far East, by the way. So if you've heard a rumor that you can't find anything in this country because it's all going to China, never sold one bottle in China.
Oh, but they sure buy your bottles on eBay.
Yes, they do. What was the name of it? I don't remember that one. Yeah. Is that Chicago? Yeah.
Was there one in Kansas City? I think I might have something for you. Yeah.
Doesn't ring a bell for me, but y'all might have done it too. I don't know. But we did Berghoff in Chicago, and a lot of private label. And
Macy's.
Macy's?
Yeah, Macy's had a bottling.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a good story on Pappy. This was told to me by Norm Hayden, that he was sitting down with Conrad Hilton of Hilton Hotels, and he was trying to negotiate, the private label there, and Conrad said, "Well, your whiskey's too expensive. We're gonna have to go somewhere else," and Pappy said, "Well, can you tell me about the steakhouse across the street?" He's like, "Oh, well, it's not very good." He's like, "Well, your steaks are just so expensive. I have to go across the street to eat that less of a product."
Yeah.
And that switched Conrad to take
there you go.
Fitzgerald. So, king of the salesman.
He's pretty good.
One more question before we go into the auction.
Wow.
Hayden turns 90. Wow.
Good for him.
Well, thank you for tonight. You alluded to this earlier, but how do you plan for your inventory? Because I would think with the pressure to sell now what you have, how do you determine what to put away for the future?
This barrel model we have, like I say, is in a computer, and it's pretty by the numbers. We take what we sell this year and are selling of a certain age, and next year, because we've upped production for the last 14 years, we're going to have a few more cases of that. So you look at that all the way down the line times 5 or 6 items, it's pretty much cut and dried. Now, it can change depending on market situations. If the old whiskey stops selling or young whiskey stops selling, we'll vary a few things. But the money grab would be to sell all this whiskey now at 10 or 12 years old, because that's we got it. But then down the road, you're just going to starve to death. So It takes a lot of patience to be in it's like the tree growing business. I don't want to be in the white oak business. Those trees are 80 to 100 years old. Imagine their business plan. So it's like two generations to, you plant a tree, you never see it be made into a barrel.
So that'll do it for the interview that I had in 2016 with Julian Van Winkle. Now, right after that, we had the auction, and we sold a I believe it was distilled in 1968 and bottled in 1984. And all the proceeds went to the Kentucky Derby Museum. One of the most odd auctions I'd ever been a part of in my life, because after that, there was also the 10-year-old bottle of old Rip Van Winkle. And this was when they had like a really nice label. It was more attractive looking label-wise and bottle-wise than the vintage Stitzel-Weller. The Stitzel-Weller, as I recall, sold for like $1,200, which, you know what? I would have paid that. I should have paid it that night, but funds were pretty tight then. They are now too, but really then they were really tight. We had just had our baby. Oscar, I think, was like, he wasn't even a year old yet. Oh, wait. No, he was like 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old. But anyway, so funds were tight then. I didn't bid on it, and I wish I did it, because that was like a really good buy for something from the 60s. That was Stitzel-Weller, it was like $1,200. And then the 10-year-old, which was the more contemporary one, had the nice, beautiful label. A couple of younger guys spent $1,800 on it. So that was one of the first Pappy phenomenon auctions I had seen. And I've since seen Pappy sell over like iconic Stitzel-Weller whiskey, several times. But that was kind of mind-blowing to me at that auction. But that was a great night. A big thanks to the Kentucky Derby Museum for allowing me to reuse this, to share it with people. I don't know what that event's going to look like in the future. I don't know what any event's going to look like in the future. But I know I've had 8 great years with the Kentucky Derby Museum and with the Legend Series. And I hope that we can all get back together there soon. I'm going to be pulling up more of these older interviews. I'm also going to have more Q&As going. And then I've got my nightly tastings every night at 9 o'clock. I'm going to have my tastings, my face-offs, and everything. That schedule is coming soon. So make sure you click that subscribe button, and you get alerts to when these tastings happen. So thank you all so much for joining me today. Every day at 1 o'clock, we're going to have some kind of good, fun interview, either from archival or in contemporary sense. And that'll do it for the 1 o'clock show. I'll see you tonight at 9 o'clock. And remember, vodka sucks unless it's being used for hand sanitizer. Cheers.